I am the daughter of a Chinese immigrant dad and a white American mom. Growing up biracial, I have always stood on the cross-cultural cornerstone that bridged the gaps between my two worlds, East versus West, privilege versus sacrifice. I belong to a new generation hallmarked by confidence and adaptability, possessing a deft ease with navigating the pressures of an existence never marred by the hardships of building a life from scratch. I am a member of first-generation Americans, a group that's filled with the raw hopes of our parents' generation to achieve something greater. I have always felt that the American dream was within my reach, but I also never fully grasped what that really meant. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class household in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., spending my childhood days coming home to a beautiful, stately structure with sky-high ceilings and bright green houseplants lining the marble floors. I was fortunate enough to be supported by my dad, both emotionally and financially, throughout college and graduate school. I overcame any obstacle without fear or instability and often took this for granted. So when my dad called me to tell me that he was cutting me off financially, I reacted selfishly and immaturely, without any thought. "I'm not moving back home. I hate that place. It's in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing there for me," I complained. My dad sighed, his exasperation with me stretching thin. "You kids have it so easy, you don't even understand," he said. "When I was 24 years old, I booked my flight to the US with only $40 in my pocket, completely alone." He went on to tell me how a mere hour after arriving at JFK Airport, he was immediately gypped by a taxi driver, losing all of his money for an overpriced ride to the Chinese consulate. The consulate was providing temporary $5 per night rooms for newly arrived Chinese students like my dad, who was left empty in a foreign country. "When I moved to Maryland, I found a kitchen staff job at a Chinese restaurant to help pay for my school tuition," he said. "I worked long hours, cutting vegetables and preparing the broth. I felt so suffocated by the hot steam from boiling soup on one side and the smokiness from stir fry on the other. Sometimes I'd have to step outside during breaks just to breathe." I could hear a sliver of retrospective pain in my dad's voice as he rehashed his early immigrant experiences. At 24 years old myself, I never struggled to survive, let alone starting over in a land so far away and different from my home country. "I met your mom in 1991, my dad continued. "We married in 1992 and had you the following year. We moved into the basement. You remember, right? At Mr. Lau's house. We thought we were so lucky, a 2-bedroom basement apartment with a backyard too." At that point, I'd already earned my MBA and found a managerial position at Citibank. Your mom and I saved money year after year. Right before we had your brother in 1999, I decided to buy the land and build the big house. I flash back to my world at 5 years old when I used to visit the construction site and play with dusty blocks of sandalwood as my dad perspired profusely while drilling or heavy lifting. My future home was still in its skeletal stages, with measuring tapes, pencils, and copies of the blueprint lying around. I remember rarely seeing my dad that year. "I went there every day after work. I was so tired, but it was my dream to build this house for you kids," my dad said. He paused. "The house you now say you hate so much," he added softly. With that, my heart broke for him. Instantly wrought with shame and guilt, I apologized to him. "I'm sorry, Dad, just so sorry. I hadn't heard this story before, and it certainly shed light on a perspective I had never acknowledged. For me, it's relatively easy to overlook the hard work and perseverance it took for my dad to provide me a life of unlimited opportunity and access, and it is one that I will never feel like I truly deserve. Today's first-generation Asian American experience is highly influenced by the burden our immigrant parents bore for us, driven by the unifying quest to fulfill their American dream and set a foundation to help their children chase it too. I may not have endured long hours working at a restaurant or lived paycheck to paycheck, fogged with dreaded uncertainty, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a part of my roots. Bridging the gaps between my two worlds also means bridging the gaps between the Asian American immigrant and the Asian American natural-born citizen. It's about understanding that I am responsible for paving a new pathway for my generation as well, upholding what we've been taught as we continue to carve our identities in an ever-evolving multicultural society. Because my soul will always be a part of the sleepless nights in that tiny, hot room shared with 10 other students at the Chinese consulate, the 4-hour bumpy bus ride from New York to Washington, those 1 a.m. shifts spent cleaning the kitchen while deliriously laughing with your fellow Asian immigrant coworkers, the traditional American wedding followed by the traditional Chinese wedding, and the long Saturday afternoons spent driving your American kids home from Chinese language school. This is how we press on. moving forward together while never forgetting where we came from.